In this demonstration, we'll cover utilization monitoring. This is something you should do on your network hosts, such as workstations and servers, as well as your network infrastructure devices, such as switches, routers, firewalls, and so on. We don't have time to cover all of these devices in this demonstration. We'll look at monitoring utilization on this Windows workstation. The principles are the same with all devices. The process you'll use will vary depending on the device. On a Windows workstation, there are two tools you can use to monitor utilization: Task Manager and Resource Manager. Let's first look at Task Manager. To start Task Manager, right-click the taskbar and select Task Manager. By default, the applications that are running are displayed. This is a list of applications that are running on the system. There's not a lot you can do or see here as far as monitoring utilization. If you want more information, you can go down to More Details here at the bottom. On the left, we start with the Process tab. Here you have 4 columns: CPU, Memory, Disk, and Network. If you want a quick look at the processes that are using the most resources, you can click here and sort the column. This is useful if, for example, you want to see how much memory an application is using. From here, you can also right-click a process and get a menu for more options, such as ending the task. You can also select Search Online to read more about the process. On the Performance tab, you see several parameters. First, there's CPU utilization. You can see overall CPU usage. Here, you can see the current % of utilization. This graph over here represents the average of all the CPUs in the system. Down here, you can see the maximum speed, how many sockets we have, how many cores, and the logical processors. This gives you an idea of what's happening with the CPU. Occasional spikes here are nothing to be concerned about. Obviously, the more applications you have running, the more CPU you're going to use. Let's look at memory. Here's how much physical memory is installed on the system. This line shows how much of the physical memory is in use. Down here are the numbers that tell you what's going on. If we go down here to Ethernet, we can monitor network utilization. There are other tabs in Task Manager, so let's take a quick look at them. We have App History. By default, the App History tab displays usage only for modern and universal Windows platform apps. Since we don't use these apps very often, it's not going to show a lot. Under Startup, we can see the impact that apps and programs have on the system when it's starting up. If there's a program you don't need every time you use the system, and you want your system to start up faster, you can disable the program by right-clicking it and selecting Disable. For example, this program here, Skype, isn't necessary on the system. We can disable it. But be careful not to disable something like your antivirus from starting when Windows boots. Under Users, you can see who's logged in. If this were a system that multiple users logged into, there could be times when another user did not log off completely. In that case, that user's account is using resources in the background, potentially slowing down the system. The Details tab shows a few more options than the Process tab. It also allows you to access some advanced options. For example, if you want Explorer to have a higher priority than whatever is set by default, you can right-click it and set the priority higher. You then get a dialog box asking you to confirm. We'll select Change Priority. The last tab is Services. Under here, you can see all the services running on the system. One useful thing here is that you can start, stop, or restart a service. Okay, let's go back to the Performance tab. All the tabs in Task Manager are quite useful. If you need a quick glance at what's going on in the system, you use Task Manager. However, if you want to see more detail, you can use a second tool, and that's Resource Monitor. If your system is not working correctly or efficiently, you should do a detailed analysis of what's going on. You use Resource Monitor because it displays more information. Let's go down here and click Open Resource Monitor, and let's close Task Manager. On the Overview tab, you get a summary view of what's going on with the system. Basically, it's a lot of the same information that we saw in Task Manager. We can look at CPU. Here we see a list of all the processes running on the system. We can get an overview of the overall utilization, and notice over here there are graphs showing what's going on. Here's the CPU. Below that, we have the disk. We also have network utilization. And finally, at the bottom, we have memory utilization. And again, if you want more detail, you just go to a specific tab. Let's go up to the CPU tab. We can see all the processes running on this CPU. If we click Services, we can see a list of the services that are running on the system. On the right, we can see graphs for the CPU utilization total. It displays the amount of CPU used by services on the system, and it graphs utilization for the 2 cores in the CPU. Likewise, we can go to the Memory tab. We see a list of all the processes running on the system and how much memory each one is using. We have a graph that shows the memory allocation in the system, how much is in use, how much is in standby, and how much is free. Up here, we can see what's using the most memory. This is useful if you're troubleshooting a problem where you have excessive memory utilization. By clicking the various columns, you can see the processes that are using the most memory. On the Disk tab, we can see the processes that are currently accessing the disk. Here at the bottom, we can see the drives and storage usage. We can also go to the Network tab and see the processes that are currently using the network. Under Network Activity, we can see the services and processes running on the system and how much they're using. We can see the services that are sending and receiving. Let's go down here. Under TCP connections, we can see the connections that are currently established between this system and another system. We can see the process that established the connection. We can see the IP address of the local network board and the port that is in use on the local system. We can also see the remote system that we're connected to and the port that is in use on the remote system. One useful thing down here, especially from a security standpoint, is the list of listening ports. These are network ports that are currently open on the local system. You can see which port it is and the process associated with that port. Over to the right, just like all the other tabs, there are graphs that provide a quick visual representation of what's going on. That's it for this demonstration. We talked about monitoring utilization. We first looked at using Task Manager to monitor CPU, memory, disk, and network. Then we explored looking at those same parameters using Resource Monitor.